welcome everybody. Maybe kind of an odd position that I'm in. I realize that I don't actually have to get up in this position if I wanted to record, because I can just narrate things to you from lying down. And I'm feeling a little, just kind of lazy, a little weary, so I thought I would speak from this position and try to tell some stories or something. So I'm in New Hampshire. I am at my friend Stina and her husband Dov's place, and it is morning, and I got up and had a little coffee, and I don't know, just feeling maybe a little too much coffee, a little too caffeinated, and yeah, doesn't this look like what you'd expect for me to be caffeinated? No. Anyway, I have been doing some thinking about this process of doing these video diary or log or whatever things, and doing a lot of thinking about how it differs from the writing process, and some of it's about the reflectivity of word choice, that when one is writing, one sort of contemplates for a long time exactly what one's going to say, and sometimes chooses between different words, tries to create an atmosphere or turn a phrase or build up in a certain direction, and that something like this, where I'm just talking at a blank screen, is a lot more organic and a lot less subject to editing. I mean, I certainly could take a lot of time to edit and go back and revise things, or even type out scripts for myself that I then deliver, which I considered, but that's not really what this is about. It's about sort of a live, interactive or non-interactive process, and actually the nature of it not being interactive is also something that I've been contemplating a lot and thinking about, because I feel like I'm a pretty decent, entertaining storyteller when I'm in person hanging out with friends. I have a decent amount of friends and have a lot of fun hanging out with them, talking to them about various things, telling old stories. And there's something about the feel of that I feel I haven't quite been able to capture in this environment and this situation. And I think a lot of that is about the iteration, that there isn't an interactive process, that you're not talking back at me, or I can't hear you if you are, and you're not making jokes or going on tangents with me. One of the things I really enjoy about storytelling is sort of the tangential nature of things, that I start talking about one friend, and then that links me to a backstory that I have to tell to understand that friend, and then another thing and another thing. Also shared memories. I don't know if you're a stranger, I don't know if you're a close friend, I don't know what we've shared or haven't shared depending on which person is listening or watching. And so there's not really a shared body of memories to appeal to. Because I was thinking, some of the storytellers I really admire, people like Garrison Keillor comes to mind as a fantastic monologue storyteller. He doesn't have the iterations or the interactions, but even someone like him, you have sort of this iterative nature of things, where over the course of time there are characters in Lake Wobegon that he talks about that you're familiar with and that you come to know, and he tells stories about them, and he doesn't need to re-explain everything, even though the re-explanation is sort of the tangential thing that I like in a lot of ways and that is interesting, but he doesn't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. There's a familiarity, there's a shared body of work, which again you may have from years of reading my blog and seeing me now or being my friend, but you may not have, and that makes it a little harder to know how to target this particular thing. So I don't really know what this is, but it's interesting. I'm having fun with it. I'm just trying to roll with it and not do a whole lot of self-questioning, and that's another aspect of things that I think people get really caught up in, especially in creative projects, that you can drown a creative project really easily before it starts or before it gets off the ground by just questioning it too much, or being too self-conscious or too self-aware and saying, gee, how does this come across, or I'm making this whole thing about myself, and is that narcissistic, or do people like what I'm doing, is anybody going to tune in, why do I only have X number of views or hits or whatever. And I think that it's really important in a creative project, in a creative process, to try to suspend the outside perception as much as possible. This is one of the reasons that when I'm writing, I make sure to not show anybody anything that I'm working on until the project is finished. And in writing a novel, that can be a long and torturous process, 3 months, years sometimes. Technically I was working on American Dream On for 7 or 8 years, even though it was really only intensely and seriously for 3 months. But and not even talk to people about plots that I haven't written if I can avoid it. There's a few exceptions to that, but I don't want feedback, because that feedback is going to color the nature of what I write. And I want feedback eventually on the finished product, but I really think that too much iteration and back and forth in the process of creating a creative vision is liable to just make me, at least, I think most people, to sort of self-aware and looking at yourself. This also plays into debate, which is something that I think all of you debaters out there will become familiar with. Something I was talking to one of my debaters, Bargaby, about the other day, and actually a few other people after that. And that is that when you're debating in a debate round, if you become too aware that you are debating, and if you think about that too much, sort of you get in your own head, and you say, gee, I'm debating right now, and how am I doing at that? And you start questioning yourself, then you start to totally trip up. It's like doing the same thing when driving or typing. You can talk yourself into a frenzy and say, isn't it crazy that I'm able to find letters without thinking about where those letters are, and that I'm doing this automated road process, or that when I turn this wheel, the entire vehicle that is a deadly weapon that can go 70 or 100 miles an hour and could traverse thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of land over the course of its lifetime, that I can control it just with my motor functions. And then you can start to think about your own motor functions and just the nature of your brain sending signals to your hand and how crazy that is. And you can start to totally freak out. I mean, I don't know. Different people react in different ways. Some people might find this kind of cool to think about. But I think that when you're trying to do something rote, when you're trying to do something automatic, that kind of awareness and that kind of thought process about that ends up tripping you up. So even in this, if I think too much about what am I going to say, am I boring people, how is this going on, then I'm liable to trip up and start stumbling and start sort of losing confidence, which is particularly problematic when I'm just doing this sort of live, continuous shot and trying really hard not to edit things or have elapsing things or whatever. So, who knows? I don't care if it works or not, right? Because that's the whole message of what I'm trying to say. So, get you caught up to speed a little bit on the trip. Yesterday was day 2. Didn't record anything from then because I was pretty much wall-to-wall busy. I didn't end up quite making it up to New Hampshire from the evening. I ended up stopping in, I think, Lowell, Massachusetts, in this really dingy, cruddy motel room, but it was cheap, and since I was checking in at 2:30 or 3 in the morning, I didn't really care. So it was about an hour shy of New Hampshire. Stayed there. Woke up in the morning, came up, ended up having lunch with Stina and Dobbs, and met us up later. And then we mostly just ended up driving around. We were going to drive up to a so-called mountain. They don't really have mountains in Maine and New Hampshire. They claim to, but there are these little tiny foothills that don't have any mountains that they're footing to. And we had a lot of fun jokes when Zimmy kept saying, see that mountain over there? And I was like, where? There's like a slight rise in the landscape that barely dented the sky. So anyway, no mountains here. As I think, pretty sure this is exactly true. It's pretty close to true, if not, that the lowest point in New Mexico is at a higher elevation than the highest point in all of New England. So, that pretty much sums up my western mountain elitism. Anyway, so we went up to Maine. We were going to go, I guess, to Wildcat Mountain, which I guess is in New Hampshire. I guess it's named after the mascot of UNH. I don't know. It's probably one of those chicken and egg things. Which came first. And we didn't... Yeah, I guess the mountain closes at 5 o'clock. Presumably because they have to take down the facade and, clean it so it looks like there's actually a mountain to other people, and then put it back up in the morning. And So we didn't end up going because we set out for this place that was about 2 hours away at about 3 o'clock and didn't realize until we were almost there that they wouldn't let us in. So then we ended up driving over to Portland, Maine, and the small Portland, the not real Portland, that's for you, Zim, and ended up having dinner and dropping off Zim and coming back. And on the way back, Stina and Dov and I stopped at the ocean, the Maine coast, in this place called, I keep wanting to call it Algonquin, because that's, I think it was named for the Algonquin tribe, and they just misspoke a little bit. It's like Algonquit, I think, but it clearly seems to derive from the same language or the same peoples. So we stopped there, and there was this rocky shoreline that we walked along, this place called Marginal Way, which is a pretty, I mean, it's obviously a fitting name because you're on the margins, but it also makes it sound like it's kind of, yeah, I mean, there's a good road, and then there's the Marginal Way. So we walked along the Marginal Way, and it was no, it was actually quite beautiful, and you can go and do some rock hopping from there, and we, we're there at sunset, and unfortunately, East Coast sunset isn't over the ocean, it's in the opposite direction, which is a little strange, but it was still pretty. Came back up the path, and I ended up getting kind of somber, a little bit somber in my own head, as we were coming up on the path to a certain extent, because obviously there's a lot of loneliness that I'm feeling in the context of this trip and this whole situation, and confronting a lot of situations, being someone who's not getting any younger and is involuntarily single, and I don't know, seeing so many couples, clearly a place that a lot of vacationing couples have, and it's a little too early to declare my hopes of not dying alone to be dead, but it's easy when you've been rejected by the love of your life to feel like no one else is ever going to provide that kind of solace for you that you thought you had. So that was a little difficult, and also got to thinking some of the things that I'd sort of not even assumed or presumed would happen in my life, though there's something about that too, but also some of the visions of the future that I thought I had that sort of were flashes. This thing where I feel like my future self is often sending me messages back to me, and I feel like I've actually been on the other end of those in the future and sent those messages back. And sometimes I think signals get crossed, or there's possible futures because we don't actually live in a predetermined world and have a destiny and a fate. We have free will, and there's an open future. So obviously not all of those come to fruition, and one of them is about the daughter that I thought I would have with Emily. And, can't rule out that that's going to happen, but it looks like quite a long shot at this point, and it's just hard. It's hard to see families and children, there were a lot of children around, and deal with that vision of sort of what's been wrested away from one. So that was exciting and fun and uplifting, and then got in the car, and Stina started putting on sort of ocean-themed music, a lot of things to sing along to, and it got me reminded of this one night that Stina and my friend Ariel and I drove around Waltham. So Stina was in my class at Brandeis, but she ended up graduating in 3 years, and so she was wrapping up a few things in September of our senior year in college, and then was going to fly out to Escondido, which is a suburb of San Diego, and work for AmeriCorps, which turned out to be a total disaster, but she was coming off of an earlier summer in the Grand Canyon, and I had talked to her about the West, and she had had such a great experience in the Grand Canyon, and was like in love with the West, and didn't really realize that AmeriCorps is something of a scam, or is often poorly run, at least. Some people have had good AmeriCorps experiences, I'm sure. And so I was really excited about making this work and working in I think a school environment, I don't remember exactly. And so, shortly before she was slated to leave, not quite the last night before she was slated to leave, she and Ariel and I went and started driving around, and I was, somewhat prone to sadness, as I often am, and, there was a lot of nostalgia and sadness about her leaving, and one of both Ariel's and my closest friends at Brandeis not being around for that year, and Ariel hadn't been around for most of the prior year for various complicating factors, and so she was sort of a year behind, but she was back for this year, but, so the three of us who were always close friends hadn't been quite lining up that much for a while, and Stina was about to leave, and I think this was definitely the last night all three of us were going to hang out. And so we drove around, and pretty quickly, the idea turned to music, because music is a big thing for all three of us, and we spent a lot of time sharing music and talking about different bands and songs and things we found meaningful. Now you've got to understand, Ariel and Stina are both trained, not professional singers, but they've both been professional singers, I think, at some point in their life. And has Ariel ever actually been professional? I mean, Ariel was in one of, probably the premier a cappella group at Brandeis. Stina was in a cappella groups at different times, with definitely, part of professional singing outfits for revels and other situations. So, both of them very good trained singers. And before my voice changed, I used to be sort of in that company to a certain extent. I was in musicals when I was 8, 9, 10. I was in this hybrid of Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol called The Dickens Play that was performed in Oregon a couple of years in a row, and used to sing a lot and was in choirs and had this sort of classic angelic soprano type voice. And then I matured and my voice changed, and somehow in that process I forgot how to carry a tune, and I became sort of tone deaf, and just everything fell to pieces. So I sing along, as I've promised that you might see in one of these car shots on this road trip, but it's pretty horrific. It's if you shut off the music and just listen to me, it would probably sound like croaking toads. And when I get around other people who are good at singing, like when we go to Waffle House and have jukebox sing-along day with, again, trained good singers like Chris Bergman and Dave and Alana and people like that, and I'm sitting there croaking along, it's pretty embarrassing. Especially with how quiet the music is in the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania Waffle House. Anyway, so point being, they're very good sports for putting up with me, or they just try to sing louder or whatever. But we do have this tradition, and there's something about singing along to music, I think, that even if, it becomes transcendent of the skill, the main thing everybody's listening in to and trying to tune into is the actual music anyway. And it's not really about each individual voice, and there's, an effort to harmonize. I'm sure for people who are all trained and good at singing, there is that sort of effort to synchronize and have this energy, and that it's really magical. But for me, as a bad singer, it's more about the shared experience of the emotions with other people. In a shocking move, something is about the emotions for me instead of the technical skill of it. And so, anyway, see, I was thinking that would be a great place where there would be a good interactive moment, because someone would crack a joke normally if I were having that conversation, and would make a sarcastic comment back, and then we would all have a laugh about our shared experience. And it's hard to do that with a sort of empty computer screen, but we can still insert that proxy moment there and pretend that that's happened. And now I'm getting back outside of my head and realizing what I'm doing and thinking too much about that instead of the story I was immersed in telling. So because I'm so emotional, and we're, emotional people, and Stina and I have this thing, I believe I was driving the Kia, because I had it out there for that year, and we were just sort of driving around, wandering aimlessly through back roads in the darkness. And Ariel, I think, was in the back, and Stina was up front, manning the CD player. So Stina and I just got into this groove, as we sometimes have in the past, I believe, where we wanted just the saddest music possible, and we just did this sort of slow descent into Sad Bastard World. So, I think I occasionally made some suggestions, but she was pretty much in control of it, and it was just sort of this descent into very sad music, a lot of which had particular significance or relevance to Ariel or to me or to Stino or to all three of us, and things that we had discussed in some way or another in that genre, and it was just this descent into tears and sadness and bloodletting emotionally, which I find very cathartic and great, and I think Stina does too, and Ariel was sort of either fake or real complaining at different times of like, no, bring it, where's the uplift, why isn't this coming back? And I think we had like almost all of Stina's CD collection and a lot of mine. We loaded up CDs. This had been a somewhat spontaneous but somewhat planned event that we would just sort of drive around, and I think we initially had a destination and decided pretty quickly that we were just enjoying the moment and singing along to all these sad things. Certainly, I think the Indigo Girls version of Romeo and Juliet, which is one of the classic sad sing-along songs in this situation that obviously has a lot of significance to me, and I feel like to most people, seemed one of the quintessential highlights. There was some Say Hello, Wave Goodbye from David Gray, and so you're getting a sense of these kinds of songs that we were going on to. I don't quite remember. I believe that evening was September 10th, 2001. It may have been September 9th, but I'm almost positive it was September 10th. And the next morning, or maybe the day after the next morning, obviously, as we are famously told by politicians, the world changed, and certainly our world changed to a large extent, even if notions of the world changing are somewhat US-centric and hubristic and exaggerated. And then not long after that, my world changed, of course, as I had an interaction, or a series of interactions, largely talking about things like that with Emily, and the rest was history between us after an all-night diner trip in New York City at Columbia University on September 14th, 2001, where we hung out at Tom's Restaurant, the famous Seinfeld diner, after holding a vigil as part of the Columbia Novice Tournament that was being held and not canceled so shortly after September 11th in New York City. And obviously yesterday, day before yesterday, rather, I was back there in all those surrounding environs, and it's part of what makes returning to Columbia every time I go a little bit challenging, a little bit difficult, but also theoretically a little bit cathartic, because if things could change for the better then, maybe theoretically, hope against hope, things could change for the better in the future also. And I guess that's where I'll leave it today, with hope against hope and sad songs on the way. I'm Storey Clayton. This is day 3 of the Homesick Heartache Tour. I'll see you soon.